Hi, everyone. Welcome to the Asian American Pacific Islander panel for Sexual Assault Awareness Month. I'm Payal Patel. My pronouns are she, her, hers. And as part of my day job, I'm the communications director at Navy Pier in Chicago, which is a large-scale tourist destination. And beyond that, I'm involved in a few different groups and organizations that do center around women empowerment, from UN Women USA, Chicago's committee and Sorry's to Suits, all of which have had some sort of conversations or touch on the subject of survivor justice. And so I'm really excited to lead this conversation today and help facilitate a really great and productive discussion. So briefly, I just want to share that, as many of you may know, observed every April, Sexual Assault Awareness Month is an annual campaign to raise public awareness about sexual assault and educate communities and individuals on how to prevent sexual violence. So today's panel event and discussion is designed to do just that. Over the next hour, we'll be engaging in a very important dialogue on marginalization, restorative survivor justice, and the need for inclusive services for AAPI communities. So for more background, survivors at the margins are often erased, silenced, and forgotten in the movement to end sexual violence. Only when we center marginalized survivors can we create a culture where sexual violence is eradicated. So today's discussion is centered on the AAPI community, and joining us for this discussion, our expert panelists will be offering their critical insights on how we can all be a part of productive and impact-driven change. So with that, I want to go down our panel and have them introduce themselves and share their pronouns and a little bit of background. And we'll begin with Maryann. Why don't you take it away?
Hi, everyone. I'm Maryann Samreth. My pronouns are she, her, and I am a trauma writer and a trauma writing coach and the founder of Sincerely Miss Mary. It was a once anonymous pen name account, now turned brand, where I also launched a podcast called Mental Breakthrough. And I basically use my platform to empower people to share their stories and feel safe sharing their truths and knowing that their courage is going to be contagious.
How about Nadya? Would you like to go next?
Yeah, sure. I'm Nadya. I am 23. I'm in my last semester at Harvard College right now, and I am the co-founder of August, which is a lifestyle period brand, and the author of the book Period Power. So super excited to be here and honored to be amongst such incredible AAPI women. So thank you for having me.
And finally, Sheel.
Hi, I'm Sheel. Thank you so much for having me. I'm a holistic health care practitioner. I also am a children's EQ teacher, and I'm also a sexual assault survivor. I help make a law for campus safety under the late Senator Arlen Specter about college cover-up scandal, and really help make reformations at a state school in Philadelphia and help change the programs across all school systems, because the way that it has been set up now, as you had said, Payal, is that the colleges have jurisdiction with the police system and everything else when sexual assault happens on college campuses. And the problem is the bias is towards the college and the imagery. And so I was able to go in through, my own trauma and through going through it myself, being able to show them where the gaps in the system were, to show them how it's so essential for the actual national government to step in and be able to make sure that we were protecting the victims, not just the school. And so I'm very, very passionate about having these conversations so that we can make sure that it doesn't happen to other people and we can protect each other along the way. So thank you so much for having me.
Thank you all for joining us. And the passion really does shine through all of you and each of your work and respective activism work that you're doing in the community. So thanks for joining us. Thanks for offering your insights. And with that, we're going to dive into some questions that will center around today's topic. So the first question is, what are a few barriers that AAPI survivors may face after sexual abuse, domestic violence, or human trafficking? And I'll open this up to any of you to jump in and start the conversation.
Yeah, so I think that it's the environment that we live in now makes it unsafe for survivors to speak up. We live in a system that kind of protects perpetrators and silences survivors and victims. And just from my experience, when I spoke up about my sexual assault, my perpetrator, I was silenced by the system that I was in, which was my ex's my ex and like his family. And it's creating a safer culture for people to feel safe sharing their stories. And I really think that it's when people share their stories and they come out, it's everyone around them listening, not victim blaming them, not victim shaming them, but just validating their story and honoring their courage of speaking up. Someone that speaks up about their perpetrator is not seeking attention. They just want justice.
I absolutely love that, because I think that that's something that I've realized in my own journey in a very similar way, is that people would rather blame the victim, especially in our community, because it shows that we're not perfect, right? And so like, you have ruined the perfection, and so they'd rather believe that the victim is lying than believe that there's someone evil in their midst, right? Or someone that could create or commit a violent act in their midst. And they don't. And I think it's really important to shed light on the fact that we're human. And unfortunately, being human means that there's things that are terrible that happen, but also being human, that we can protect each other and we can listen to each other and honor each other, not just the person that looks a certain way. And that the people that commit crimes like that are usually people that are high standard society, right? Like, we need to actually share real statistics, and real statistics are most people that commit sexual assault and like all these things are usually your family members, usually of high society, usually people you know. They're not someone off the street, and usually they're people that are really good at making people like them. And that is the problem that we have, is that we've created this dialogue that it's this one-off thing of something that happens in a garage or something that happens randomly, but it is usually in family. And when we have these conversations, in a way of saying that if you have these conversations, you create safety, versus if you have these conversations, you're going to make it seem like you're not safe, right? Like, that's the problem. They blame the victim because they make the victim seem that you've created an environment that's not safe, where they're showing you where it's foundationally broken. And so if you're able to share that, if you share your truth, you're able to create a foundation versus breaking the foundation. I feel like it's going to help ease the journey of creating an environment that we can speak about it and, comfort each other, but also create safety for each other.
Yeah, no, that's a great point, Sheel. I was just going to say that that's exactly the type of understanding I grew up with, that, oh, rape happens in an alley when you're, walking at night, and it happens within people and groups that we already have knowledge and association with. Nadya, what do you have to add regarding triggers?
So my experience was both in and out of the family. I grew up with sex abuse in my family, where my grandparents very much was like, oh, we just don't talk about it. Like, it doesn't matter. Like, if it happened, you just don't talk about it. And the idea of talking about it publicly was definitely kind of the nail in the coffin. I think it's a big part of why I'm not in touch with anybody. But I would say that there's a lot of shame, I think, first and foremost, and stigma around mental health. And so when you think about being a survivor, talking about what's happening within the family, on top of then talking about, the mental health consequences of it, it's all very hush hush. I think at the same time, when in my experience, I think that we can't have this conversation without also talking about the over sexualization of Asian women, and how that's portrayed in media, and how there's this sort of submissive, lotus flower stereotype around Asian women. And when you think about how Asian women are even portrayed in porn, right, that it's fetishized in this idea of that Asian women are being dominated, right? And so it is not rare for me to hear both comments myself, or hear stories of friends who are hearing these comments of, things that are violent in tone, but are meant in this over sexualization way of how people have been taught to think of, especially East Asian women and kind of Asian women overall. And so I think that overall there's this need for cultural shift, both in terms of destigmatizing sexual assault, so we can talk about really making the cultural and systemic changes to make sure it doesn't happen. At the same time, destigmatizing mental health, so that we can really support survivors and create these public conversations without the family consequences of feeling like this is not something decent or appropriate to talk about. And I think also, overall, what are the problematic ways that Asian women are often put in terms of media portrayals, right? And how does that continue to perpetuate these ideas around submission and objectification for sex?
Yeah, no, that's a really great point, Nadia. And I think that recent headlines have proven just that, right? With the shooting that happened in Atlanta, and there wasn't enough credit given to the fact that there is a connection there with what happened, that violent act that happened, and the sexualization of Asian American women. So there's certainly more work that needs to be done in order to bring that subject matter to light. So with that, obviously, it's Sexual Assault Awareness Month, as we mentioned earlier. Can you share a little bit about why it's important that we observe this each April, and why is it important for you for this month to be about this specific topic? Sheel, do you want to kick it off this time?
Oh, yeah. Okay. For me, honestly, as someone who's lived with it, and we talk about trauma, I don't know if we talked about it before everyone got off, but trauma, you feel it in your body, right? And when something incredibly violent happens to you, your mind shuts it down, but your body feels it periodically throughout the year. And so, like, we can't, and we've been taught, right, to be positive, that it's too heavy, that it's too this, or, we don't talk about it or whatever else. And like, I think that when you have months that are dedicated to it, when you have a whole month, yes, you can talk about it every single day. And if you need to talk about it every single day, then talk about it, because that's how you heal, and that's how you heal people around you. I have been told so many times since it happened to me to, Sheila, you're making people uncomfortable. Can't you just like not talk about it? You're making everybody uncomfortable. You're a little dense. Yeah, well, you know what? Like, I have bruises all over my body. So I'm going to talk about this because something terrible happened to me and I don't want it to happen to anybody else. And I want people to know that they're not alone. And every time I talk about it, every single time, someone always says something to me and they're like, that happened to me too, I just never told anybody. And these are people that have happened 15 years ago or whenever. And because I talked about it in that moment, they were talking about it and they were able to heal through it. And we can't heal unless we discuss it. And I'm a holistic health practitioner, and so there's a lot of people that come in with stomach pain or back pain or whatever else. And when you work on it energetically, it's actually trauma. It's not, the stomach isn't the problem. The body is just relaying the immense amount of pain that's in your mind and in your heart. It's just that we've been able to tell ourselves that we're not going to think about it, but our body's like, well, I'm still feeling it, and like, my trauma versary is October 13th. And even when I don't even know that I'm going into October, I literally start shivering every single October. And I'm like, why do I feel so weird? Why is my body experiencing it? And that's how intelligent the body is. The body will remember even when you don't. And so when you have a month that you're able to discuss it, yes, we get to heal, but other people get to heal. And we also get to create a boundary for people that do commit crimes like this to know that there are enough people that are willing to protect each other and enough people that are willing to speak about it and know that it's wrong. Because I think a lot of the problem today is, and Nadia discussed this, is the way that it's portrayed in society, right? Like the way that it's discussed, like, why are there memes about violence that happen? It's not funny. Dark humor is not funny. It is problematic because, yes, you realize that it's a joke, but if I'm crazy, right? Like, I don't know another word. If I am clinically unstable and I'm going to commit a crime like that, you have just given me validation to do that. Right? Like, you have just told me that society accepts this, so I'm going to do it proudly now. And that's a lot of the problem with today's dialogue, right? Because we're creating dialogue that's accepting, right? And when you talk about it from a vulnerable point of view versus like, I'm attacking you, right? Like, when you're just saying, this is my experience, people aren't so apprehensive to the discussion that's being had. And I think it's really powerful that way, because not that they should be that way, but that's just how mind works, right? Like, oh, but when you're saying, this is something that happened to me, this is something that I'm discussing, it helps people just listen and absorb it so that they can reach a level of empathy and awareness and hopefully expand their mind and their heart so that they can be of a service to other people in their life and also be able to help somebody going through that and be an awareness, right? Like, how do I be a part of the change versus just accepting that this is a reality that I don't want to be a part of? I think it helps motivate others to take a stance and if we're stronger together, right? Like that's not a cliche line. We're stronger together. The more of us that talk about it, we get to really create a protection bubble around each other so that we can make sure that we inform people at a younger age. You know, before this started, I talked about it with Maryann, when we have discussions with people before they get to a level of violence to help them work through their emotions and work through their anger. Maybe we can prevent a perpetrator from actually committing a crime because they'll have a level of empathy that will prevent them from doing anything moving forward. And so I think these discussions are really important. And whether it be April or every single day of your life and whatever is within your emotional capacity, talk about it. Talk about it as much as possible, because that's what creates healing in the entire collective.
Yeah, for sure. Thanks, Sheel. Nadya, what about you? Why is it so important to observe this month and this particular topic?
I think that the biggest thing is when we think about how we support sexual assault survivors, or like what reactions we get, a lot of it is that our society and the people around us have truly been in denial that this is an issue. And I think that a lot of times when we think about the barriers for justice, a lot of it is, you know, it's not treated as this overarching like cultural issue that happens all the time. It's like, oh, well, this is a one-off. Why do we have to change the system if this rarely happens, right? And like even today, I remember like when I'm speaking, one of the most common responses I get, like especially from people who are of an older generation, are like, oh, well, it never happened back in my day. Like it's so crazy that sexual assault is happening so often. What's wrong with this generation? And it's like, no. It's probably the people who are talking about it more now, right? And so I think that a lot of it is this month is really important because it's kind of even more than we usually are, being able to take the stage and take the mic and say like, no, it is fucking ridiculous to see the numbers about who experiences sexual assault. What percentage of young women are experiencing this? What are the effects on mental health? Why is it that it's so hard to get justice as a survivor? And how do we really acknowledge that this isn't because of a one-off personality issue, that this truly is because we are living in like patriarchal rape culture, and we need to dismantle it from an overall cultural and systemic point. And the only way we can get decision makers who are politicians, who are leaders, who are cultural influencers to really talk about needing this long-term systemic and cultural change is by providing the data to say this isn't a one-off every now and then. This is like an unfortunately constant embedded thing that, by the way, systems are benefiting from. And so how do we bring attention to the fact that there is such a prevalence of this issue, but also create space where we can really talk about like preventative measures, right? Like Sexual Assault Awareness Month to me is also about the distribution of resources to support survivors, to create conversations about how to prevent sexual assault on top of raising awareness of the issue overall.
Yeah, well said, Nadya. What about you, Maryann? Why is this so important for you?
So they say you can't fix a problem if you don't face it, if you don't look at it. And I think this month is to honor survivors and listen to them as they share their stories, and to make them feel safe just by listening, and not like giving them sympathy, but giving them validation, truly actively listening to them and honoring their bravery for speaking up and telling their stories. My experience was enduring over a year and a half of victim blaming from my partner after I spoke up against the man that sexually assaulted me, which was his best friend. Every single day, I was gaslit to believe that it was my fault for being the victim. And when I was in therapy and I was healing from this trauma, my therapist said, like, people who can't advocate for others do not advocate for themselves first. And that hit me hard, because it just kind of made a lot of sense as to when I finally outed my perpetrator on Instagram, where his friends and family saw, they all ghosted me, because that's the system we live in, a system where people do not know how to advocate for themselves. So when they do not know how to advocate for themselves, they don't advocate for others. It's more comfortable to turn a blind eye and continue to live their lives unaffected by other people's trauma, because they themselves don't do it. So when we share our stories, we empower ourselves, we learned how to advocate for ourselves. We also show people that they too can advocate for themselves, that their story matters, their truth matters. And I think it's just continuing to tell our stories and know that our truth matters and that everyone is valid in sharing their experience. And that's what this month means to me. It's honoring ourselves as survivors and knowing that the process of healing from trauma, which also like we need to educate survivors on how to do, because like there's no access to that. When I came out with, you know, like my trauma and speaking about my story, like I didn't know like what I was experiencing was continuous trauma, complex PTSD, which is not even in the DSM. We don't even talk about that. That is experiencing prolonged trauma. And that is something that you continuously live with. So educating survivors on the process of healing, and that it is a lifelong process, but it's an empowering process. And when you are able to advocate for yourself and tell your story, like it'll also empower others to tell theirs. And yes, there's going to be haters. There's going to be people. I've been doing my trauma stories for 3 years, telling up, and also like being an Asian American, we're conditioned to sweep things under the rug. We're also in a system. We're also in a system where we're told to make other people comfortable, even when we're uncomfortable. And no, we're canceling it. I see so many more Asian Americans speaking up this year more than ever. And, you know, we're eradicating that model minority myth because we are here. We belong here. Like we're made to feel like we need permission to belong here. We already belong here. Like I was born in Chicago, went to college in Wisconsin, like, you know, like probably whiter than some white girls, you know, like I belong here. We all belong here. And knowing that we have, you know, we're allowed to take up space. We do not need permission to take up space. Like this is a month as Asian Americans to raise your voice, empower yourself, and know that it's okay. Like you're going to be supported. You're going to be supported when you tell your story. You're going to be supported when you're ready to condemn your perpetrator. Like we are here.
Amen to all of that. That's actually a great segue to the next two-part question that I have. So how do we create a safer environment for victims of sexual assault to speak up and seek help? And how do we dismantle this culture and system that's making victim blaming and victim shaming so pervasive in our society? I'll kick this question over to Nadya to answer first.
Do you mean like what makes it so conditioned, or like how it results? Yeah, overall. Okay.
Yep.
I think that the unfortunate reality of our system is that we live, like whether you call it capitalism or otherwise, right? Like we live in a system that is really created off of like hierarchies of power, right? And like when you think about how power is structured, and even like look at the history of like war and colonization, like sexual assault and rape was used as a tool, you know, to like really try to enforce that power difference, right? And like I think that that's one of the biggest things, you know, like Maryann mentioned, complex PTSD, like that's something that I try to heal from every single day, is trying to like take my power back, right? Because what is the moment where I felt most powerless, and where I felt like something that was supposed to be such a personal point of power in terms of like having, you know, being able to dictate my own body, right? And so I think that when we think about victim blaming culture, it's like, who is that protecting, right? Who has the resources to be protected by those things, right? Who has the physical strength to be able to protect those things? And I think that that's why I'm not saying that like the only people who experience our sexual abuse or assault are just women, but I do think that you see it's like very much by and large affecting women of color who don't have resources and at higher rates, because at the end of the day, who does victim blaming and who does the system protect more, right? And I think that that's a huge part of when we talk about raising awareness of sexual assault, really also talking about it in the context of the world that we live in today, and like what systems exist to be able to fight for justice for survivors as well. And I think that that's where I've been really excited to support different organizations like Free From, and, you know, these different organizations as well that are raising, you know, actual capital and resources to support survivors in their fight for justice. Because, you know, I've experienced financial instability in the past. I haven't been able to get justice, and a lot of that is because of a lack of access to resources at the time. And I think that when we think about supporting survivors overall, like it takes resources, and it takes really questioning who is given in power and who is given, you know, the support to be protected as well.
Maryann, how do you think that we can create a safer environment for survivors and dismantle this victim blaming culture?
Yeah, I think I agree with Nadia. It's accessibility to mental health. And there's not, like not many people, there's still stigma around mental health. People don't give themselves permission to get help, especially as an Asian American. You're taught to just fix yourself, but like, you need help. It's okay to ask for help. It's the bravest thing to ask for help. So like doing this panel, organizations like this that raise awareness for sexual assault and giving, programs where you do trauma informed like workshops and teaching people how to validate their pain. I think education, access to mental health, and providing the tools people need to heal from their trauma, because people don't know how to validate their emotion. They repress all of that. And it's just giving, like we were talking about emotional trauma earlier, and just giving ourselves permission to feel. And I think that's the biggest thing, is validating what happened to us and feeling all of those feelings that come with the trauma, which is shame, guilt, anger, rage, all of those feelings that we deem negative, but we need to feel those things. We need to feel anger. We need to feel rage. We need to feel all of those emotions to validate our experience and take our power back. And being able to be taught how to do those things, we need to have access to mental health care that is affordable for everyone. And that's a system thing. We live in a system that doesn't care about mental health care, that doesn't put it first. But when we are able to, fully like be able to heal and learn the tools to heal, like we are able to create a healthier culture. But right now it's so backwards. Mental health is like the last priority, but I mean, a lot of like illnesses, physical illnesses are caused by like mental health problems. So it's really tackling, putting mental health first in the system in any way we can. And I think the way to do it is to continue to just speak up and tell our stories. And like, for me, I'm like, well, I think I'm going to go to the system. Like maybe I'll eventually work towards my career path to get into the system and make this important. And more of us need to feel that way, is, why not, fight our way into the system?
Yeah, for sure. Sheel, how about you?
I love that. I completely agree with everything Nadia and Maryann said. And I think that it's important. You said you can't be an advocate, Maryann, if you don't advocate for yourself. And I think that is one of the single most important statements, is how do we teach people how to advocate for themselves? And the first step is acknowledging what you feel. It's accepting how you feel. It's expressing how you feel. And it's being able to say like take up space, right? Like I work with children, so I teach kids emotional intelligence. I work with foster kids and at-risk youth. And my foster kids, the saddest thing was a lot of them were getting abused by their birth parents, right? And so the ones that had sexual trauma from their birth parents, they knew they didn't like it, but they didn't know it was wrong. And that was the most heartbreaking thing for me, is that they started associating that with love, right? And so these kids, you could see the problematic behavior when they would see their brothers and sisters. And this is trigger warning, guys, but it taught me a lot, because the brother, when he saw his sister, would get so excited, but would try to touch her. And these are like 4 and 5-year-olds. And the sister would start shaking in my lap. And I was like, oh my gosh, like this is what starts the system, right? Like this is what starts this cycle, because this kid is doing it innocently, because this is what he was taught by his parents, right? And so I'm really thankful I worked with kids so that I could have this different way of viewing it, because at the end of the day, my goal through what I do in my work with kids is, one, to alleviate the anger before it becomes a reactive response, before it becomes valid for them to live in this state of violence, right? And for people that are sensitive, or that could be subjected to violence, to know that they are an important individual and that they have a right to live happily and safely and whatever else. And I think that we as society need to create this foundation at a basic level, at preschool, to teach kids like, you are allowed to say no, and you're allowed to say yes to the things that you want to say yes to. And you know what, if you're feeling angry, use your words, right? Like these are basic human concepts that we're not really honoring and expressing to children, right? Like we need to, like I talk about this right now with the current demographic of the world. I was like, I feel bad for kids, because kids are learning be angry at one person, don't even know why, but start yelling. Like that's what they're learning from adults right now. And I can't imagine what they're going to grow up as, right? Like, so right now, I think just being able to create an environment and whoever you're speaking with no expectations and all love, right? Like, so if I'm talking to you, I'm not going to expect that you know what my background is, and I'm not going to expect to know what your background is, but I'm going to talk to you in a way that I would talk to a child, not in a demeaning way, but in a way of conversing to like really connect and understand each other. And I think when we do that, we're going to be able to, like, we'll create harmony with each other, right? Like you'll be able to tell me what you feel and I'll be able to tell you what I feel, and we'll be able to have a discussion to make it safer for all of us, right? Because I think right now everyone's like, well, I don't want to be wrong, right? Like everyone is under attack and all of us need to feel safer, right? This isn't an issue that affects one person. Like 1 in 3 people are raped, right? Like that is way too many. And you definitely know someone in your family has gone through this. So if we start creating spaces where people feel safe to be seen and heard and feel and just be who they are, like the freedom of being happy, right? Like, and know that they have a right to it. It's not a freedom to it. They have a responsibility to it, right? Like you as a person have a responsibility to take care of yourself, not everyone else, yourself. And then in taking care of yourself, you have grace for other people. I think that's how the world will begin to shift. And that comes from advocating for yourself, for having grace for yourself. And I just feel like the more that I gave myself that comfort, because when I went through it, Maryann, I like want to give you like a big hug, is because I didn't have time to go through the trauma of going through it because I was fighting everyone else to listen to me. I was fighting everyone else to make sure that I was just on my own 2 feet and safe. And so it took me years to actually experience the trauma after I could actually just move forward in foundational safety, you know? And so I think that when we have that space and not have a limit of, you know, like of when we can talk about it, whenever you want to talk about it, and it doesn't matter if it happened 50 years ago, you have a right to talk about it, right? So I think that's one of the main things, is just being able to teach each other emotional intelligence by being emotionally expressive in our own life, you know? And so I think that's one of the things that I work on the most.
Right. Yeah, no, I think that's a great point. And it's actually segues really nicely into our next question. But before we go there, just wanted to note to the group that Nadya had to jump off, but we sent her all the gratitude for her input and insights into this discussion. So with that, we will continue. My next question is, as an AAPI, how do you empower others to raise their voice and advocate for themselves? I mean, both of you have touched a little bit about how the culture is impacted, right? The way that we show up and how we respond to all this trauma. We've been culturally taught to just, you know, it's such a shameful act. So you gotta keep it in. Don't say anything about it, and all of that we've lived with for so long. So how do you encourage the community to start changing that and speaking up and advocating for themselves? Maryann, would you like to begin?
Yeah, I think being authentic, and authenticity starts with you. It's not for anyone else. It's not for your parents, and it's not for your coworkers. It starts with you. And I think being your most authentic self in the world, it's also a practice, and it's a lot of inner love and lots of inner work, but you are like knowing that you should exist in this world just as you are, and feeling enough and worthy just as you are, is what's going to help you take up space in this world. I think growing up as an Asian American, I felt like I always was fighting self-expression and was also holding it back because I didn't know how to be myself in this world. I didn't know that I could. I always felt like held back, which is maybe why I worked as a handbag designer for 7 years. I was hiding behind a handbag because I was afraid to show myself in this world. I think as an Asian American, we're often taught to, you know, not express ourselves, not take up space, not be us. And, you know, coming out as a trauma writer within the past year, it's really given me permission to have self-expression. So knowing that like it is needed, that you are needed in this world as yourself, and to be your most authentic self is the most powerful thing in the world. And people need to see that. So give yourself permission to be you in this world. And that is going to be honored, and that's going to be loved. And for you to feel, finally being able to feel visible in this world, that's going to give other people permission to also take up space and be visible in this world.
Yep, agreed. Sheel, what about you? How do you encourage the AAPI community to advocate for themselves?
I love everything Maryann said. I would have definitely said that. I think for me and what I've done that's been beneficial to me to help people hear me and help them hear themselves is I get involved in the community and I really listen. I listen to the way that they connect with others, so I know how to use. And so, for the community that I'm in and, the people that I've worked with, when I was speaking before, it was going on deaf ears. And it was something that I realized that whether we all speak English or not, we're all speaking a different language based on what's happened to us in the past. And so that things that mean something to me will not mean something to you, and everything's filtered through that jargon, right? And so when I get involved in the community, I've started really relating mental health to physical health. And so I said, I'm in the spiritual community, and a lot of the spiritual community, unfortunately, is like, well, you're spiritual now. You don't feel those things. You're it's karma or whatever else, And so for me, I'm like, well, no matter if you're spiritual, if I break my ankle and I get a cut on my leg and it's bleeding, am I going to yell at my leg and be like, stop bleeding? We're spiritual now. I don't have to take care of this. I don't need to get stitches and it's just going to fix itself because I'm a spiritual awakened person. No, that's not going to happen. I need to take care of it. And if I don't take care of it, the rest of my body is going to start deteriorating. And I start explaining that in the same intensity and the same urgency for mental health and trauma, that when you go through these things, there's no shake it off, and we shouldn't be shaking anything off. We need to be healing it in the same way that we would be healing a physical ailment. And it's really been helping me have the momentum and helping them understand that they're very similar, whether or not you see it, it's still tangible. And so that's something that's really helped me in helping others understand what it's like to go through trauma. And it's also helped me motivate those that have endured trauma to help themselves without guilt, but with responsibility instead.
Yeah, so that also leads to another question about how can we engage in conversations about marginalization, oppression, and restorative justice with our peers, family, and loved ones. And I think this is really also important to stress with our family and loved ones, because once again, in the culture, it's just so taboo, right? It's just, there's still a lot of work to be done within the community itself. So I'm gonna kick it right back over to you, Sheel. What are your thoughts?
So one of the things that I've been working on with people, because this is a conversation I do have a lot, is that you can't be oppressed unless you allow it, right? And the way that I say this is obviously there's a bigger conversation, but on a local level, right? And I always explain it with school, is that if you're getting bullied in your classroom, you can't blame the school board, right? You need to talk to the people involved in your classroom. So you talk to your teacher first, you talk to the people that are in your local environment and really engage with them and have them involved instead of going to the last level, because I think that's what we do, right? When something happens that's traumatic and problematic in our area, we go to the last level of the people that should be the authority, when the authority is our local community, right? And so when we talk about oppression, I think that we need to go to the people that love us and should love us, right? And have these conversations at a our level instead of thinking about, oh my God, this is a big issue, right? The big issue will only get fixed when we do all the mini steps in between. And yes, it's overwhelming, but it's all a part of the bigger puzzle piece. And so when we are able to ground ourselves in our local community and say, okay, this is the conversation I'm having right now. I'm not going to think about everything else just yet. But right now I'm making a difference through this one conversation, and you will not oppress me, and I will have this conversation, and really working through understanding the person in front of you so that you can have a conversation instead of a debate, learning how to change that cadence so that it does seem like that. Just like when you go through couples therapy, right? Treat everyone like you're in a relationship with them, without toxicity. Get out of situations that are traumatic for you. But if it's not toxic at that level, if you can treat them like they're your partner and there's something that can be achieved with the two of you communicating effectively, I feel like there can be a lot of change that can be made through that.
Yeah. How about you, Maryann?
Yeah, this is kind of a tough question for me to answer, because I personally, in my family, it's hard to talk about mental health and everything that I'm doing now, because I kind of broke out of that system of being silent, and I use my voice and I raise my voice. So I personally, I seek out Asian American communities that are like me, and that empowers me to keep doing what I do, is to look for people that are also raising their voice, that are also breaking generational trauma, that also care about mental health, and joining communities of Asian American podcasters and wellness groups that helps me, or even like on Clubhouse or go on TikTok. It really helps to find people that are already there with you, because where I am right now, it's also my healing journey. And not everyone can get here. Not everyone is ready to get here. Some people there might be even too much trauma to be able to get here, because it hurts to face it. So I have compassion for that. So for me, it's really having compassion for people that are not there where I am at now, and moving towards communities where I'm surrounded by like-minded people that are going through what I'm going through. And I hope that by seeing us as our community grows, as we all start to find each other, because I went through a period of isolation where I was like, I don't have anyone, like no one understands me. But then I eventually found people that were like me. And I think that is just growing, these communities of Asian American. It's growing. Like more people are going to notice as we get bigger. And I hope that gives more permission for eventually like people in my life that are not on their healing journey yet to feel ready to come in and start their journey, and to be able to acknowledge their trauma and feel safe to do so. So I really hope that the Asian American community grows, which I'm seeing now, and that eventually everyone will feel safe to do that inner work, to start to heal, to acknowledge their traumas.
Yeah, it's funny because I was curious about whether or not you as a trauma writer are seeing people resonating with stories, especially AAPI community members, like whether or not they're looking at your stories and coming out and saying, yes, this is exactly what I'm feeling and experiencing.
Yeah, and that's exactly what I have been experiencing, because I wrote an essay that the title was, I Wanted to Be a White Girl as an Asian American, because I wanted to be a white girl when I was 6, and I grew up in a predominantly white suburb, and that's all I saw, and I thought it was ugly, and I would be crying in the bathroom at 6 years old thinking I was ugly because I didn't have blonde hair and blue eyes. And I wanted to write that because I didn't see anything like that, and I just needed to tell that story. And once I did, like so many people reached out to me and they said, me too. And it made me realize that I wasn't alone in feeling like confused about my identity. Am I Asian? Am I American? Well, I can be both 100%. I don't have to choose. I'm just both. And it's a third world culture. That's what I like to call it, because it's our own lived experiences. And when I wrote an article like amplifying 30 Asian American podcasters, I asked all of them what it's like to be an Asian American, and everyone had the same experience. They were like, I grew up confused and know whether I should be Asian or American. And then she was like, you know what, screw it, I'm both. I love me, and I love everything that makes me me. And I think that when we share stories like that and we find other people that resonate with that, it builds up that community. And I really believe that it's growing, that more people are feeling safe and encouraged to raise their voice and tell their stories.
Oh, that's so great to hear, because but as I imagine, as I've struggled with that as well throughout my young adulthood and all the way, to my early youth years. So it's great that we're now having these discussions. So with that, I have a final question for the both of you. What can service providers do to make their services more inclusive of AAPI survivors? Sheel, would you like to take this one first?
Yeah, that's a really good question. And I think the first word that comes to mind is listen, because there's no one size fits all, right? Like as much as we all have this same scenario, get more people of color on your panel, right? Like get more people that understand what it's like to be Indian or Asian American, anything, like have people that get it, because I know that was hard for me, like explaining to my therapist growing up. They were like, well, why don't you just tell your parents this? And it was like, because I can't. Like, I can't. And they're like, oh, use your voice. But like, I can't. Like, that's not what it's like to be Indian. I can't talk. Like, I get yelled at for wearing shorts. Like, there's no discussing some things, when you're Indian. So I think having people that understand what it looks like to grow up in an Indian household, but that also comes down to listening. Like, listen so you understand. Like, so even if you don't have people, because there are areas in this world or in this country that don't have those resources. But if you're someone that genuinely wants to help, then listen to what the community needs, right? Like, write about it. Like, I write on my social media about my experiences, and yes, I get flack, but I also get so many more people that are like, thank you for sharing your vulnerability. I went through this. This is what I do. This is what I need. To hold forums. Like, we have Clubhouse, we have social media, we have all these things where people, you can have a two-way dialogue focus group at all times. Like, have things that have an open-ended question and be willing to listen to those answers and implement them, because we aren't utilizing these free resources that we have available to us, and everything can be done online. So genuinely want to help, and if you want to help, then listen to what needs to be done versus what you think needs to be done. And I think that all of us being able to take part in that and give our ideas and know that they're valid is really important. And like, find people like Maryann said that are your community that want to be a part of it, and start small. Don't worry about it being big. All like, just start with 2 people. If that's all you have 2 people that are getting healed, and then 4 people will join, and just start where you are and do what you need, and guaranteed other people need the same thing.
Yeah. That's a great point. Maryann, why don't you take us home? How do you think that service providers can be more inclusive of AAPI survivors?
I think it's education for sure. I think, first of all, complex PTSD needs to be in the DSM-5. That has not been on the symptoms are worse than PTSD because you get both. So like, whoever is in charge of that, put that in DSM, because people, I think every mental health professional needs to be trauma informed and also understand what generational trauma is, because a lot of Asian Americans are experiencing generational trauma. And we're not only breaking generational trauma, which is trauma passed down from our ancestors, it's just an onion of trauma that we're dealing with. And not many mental health providers are educated on that. I think everyone needs to be trauma informed. If you're a mental health provider, you need a trauma certification, or that needs to be implemented in the system to teach people what trauma informed generational trauma is, because that is what we need specifically, because we're not just dealing with the trauma, we're dealing with trauma passed down by being Asian, and what was taught from us and what was passed down to us, like spiritually, and like, trauma being in our DNA already, like epigenetics. I think like the system needs to be educated on generational trauma, and that needs to trickle down. And then people like me and you, Sheel, like just talking about it and spreading awareness just by sharing our stories and creating this culture where like people, overall feel safe to get help. I think it starts from the top and also from the bottom, and it just spreads out. So that's my hope.
Well, I think that was just the perfect way to close this out. So thank you both for your incredible insights, your passion, and the work that you continue to do in the AAPI community and beyond. It's so important, it's critical. And so I think that I speak for everyone and I say that we're very grateful for what you're doing. Again, thanks for insights, and thank you to PAVE for this platform. This was a really important discussion. I'm glad that we got to have it today. So with that, I'm going to turn it back over to Rachel. And thank you so much for allowing me to host and facilitate this conversation and trusting me with this topic.
Of course. Thank you so much, Payal. Thank you, Maryann. Thank you, Sheel. And thank you, Nadya. This was an incredible conversation. Thank you all so much for sharing your insights, your backgrounds, and everything with us today. It was such a great conversation, and I can't wait to share it with our partners as well. So I just want to give a little bit of background about PAVE as well, just to kind of close us out. So PAVE is unique in the fact that we work on both the preventative and the educational side, and then also in healing and empowering survivors to thrive after trauma. So we work on both, the prevention education side and then also the healing side. And then actually this month is the 20-year anniversary of SAAM, and it is also the 20-year anniversary of PAVE. So we're celebrating a lot of great anniversaries this year as well. And I just want to share real quick with you a new initiative that we haven't launched yet. So this is our Survivor Outreach Center, which will be launching in the next couple of months. We've been building a nationwide coalition for the past 7 months, and we've confirmed over 800 partners, including everyone who aids in healing and supporting survivors. So these partners include people like holistic healers, therapists, rape crisis centers, domestic violence shelters, legal services and attorneys for survivors, district attorneys, nonprofit organizations, sexual assault nurse examiners, and we're growing. So if your organization is interested in joining our coalition, you can feel free to email me at rachel@pavingtheway.net, and I will give you some more information on that as well. Additionally, if anyone is feeling inspired after this conversation and wants to get involved with PAVE, there are a bunch of different ways you can get involved to make a difference in your community as well. One way is through committees. So we have a K through 12 educational task force, which works on prevention ed and K through 12 spaces. Additionally, we have a survivor support committee, which is full of survivors who are passionate about wanting to give back and help heal other survivors. Additionally, we also have an LA committee that is Shattering the Silence in Hollywood. So if anyone's interested in joining committees, again, you can email me at rachel@shatteringthesilence.org. Also, you can start a high school, college, or community-based PAVE chapter. So another way to get involved in your local community and to build a community within your community. Also, we have opportunities for people to become social media or PAVE ambassadors. So if you're passionate about the social media side of things, that's definitely something you can get involved in. And PAVE ambassadors use their voice to speak out and shatter the silence about sexual violence, domestic violence, and human trafficking. Additionally, we are also accepting applications for new members on our board of directors, and we have a summer internship program. So applications for that open on May 1st, and you can send me your resume and cover letter to rachel@pavingtheway.net. And thank you all so much again for attending our panel. I just want to leave it open if anyone has any questions in the comment section. We'd be happy to answer any questions that you might have. So I just want to put that out there as well. And then if you all want to join us next week, we will be having an additional panel on Black, Indigenous, people of color. So a BIPOC panel for SAAM, and that'll be at the same time. So 11 Central next Wednesday, the 21st. So thank you all so much. And we hope to see you next week.
Thank you.
Thank you for having us.
Yeah,
Bye.
Thank you, everyone.
Thank you so much.